And Charlie, thank you so much for being here to help us to better understand the history of Guilford County. Just a brief introduction. Charlie was born in New York State in White Plains, but I was just speaking with him, and he got to North Carolina as quickly as he could as a very young boy, and lived in High Point. And he's also a Tar Heel. He graduated with a history degree from UNC Chapel Hill in 1950. And he's really expanded on his love and knowledge of history, and has done an enormous amount of research and published several books on Rockingham County history and Guilford County history. Of course, Rockingham was initially part of Guilford, so we're all part of the big same family. So there's no one with better credentials than Charlie Rodenbough to guide us through the discussion of our religion here in Guilford County. And the reason that we're touching on this is because religion and religious groups played a very important role in the early development of the county. And the primary religious groups really provided Guilford County with a unique DNA fingerprint that makes us so much different from other cities in North Carolina and throughout the South and really throughout the country. We have a unique DNA, and that's in large part due to our religious history. So Charlie, I'm going to hand it over to you to provide us with those insights and backgrounds so that we can better understand our history. And we'll share that PowerPoint presentation and get started. But thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Benjamin. I'm glad to be here and to share this story of the founding and the settlement of the area in and around Guilford County. We here have a unique settlement background, not that it isn't replicated other places on the eastern seaboard, but it's quite different than most settlements of most counties in North Carolina, in that a predominance of influence on who settled and why they settled here comes through their faith background and the groups that they represented in coming here. Now, this is the unique part of the background to our settlement, but I'm also going to talk about some of the other influences, including the environment and the Indians, and then the influences that led through the Revolutionary War to the county becoming part of a new nation. Go ahead. Next. In terms of the beginning years, before really a concentration of settlement had come into this area, Guilford County, there were, of course, the Aboriginal, the Indians here already, and the Indians not concerned with property rights because they essentially owned everything in common. It was different than the way the Europeans coming into the eastern coast of, or the coast of America, the attitude that they had. Property rights were and holding property, owning property were extremely important to them, and they brought over as a tradition from Europe. And as the Indians were moved back away from the coast gradually, there was always this division between what was Indian land and what was settlement land. The Treaty of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, created what was called the Proclamation Line in 1743. And on this map, you see the dividing line running north to south. Essentially, everything west of that line was Indian territory, and everything east of that line was open for settlement and therefore owning land. The difference here really is striking, and it shows originally how we planned our country. Of course, very quickly, people from the eastern part or the coastal settlement part began moving west. And as they did, they kept pushing the Indians back. Next. The route for most of the people that came into our area was known as the Great Wagon Road. And on this, or the Great Settlement Road, the Great Wagon Road began in Philadelphia or in Newcastle, Delaware. In other words, on the Delaware River, where most of the European ships came, and went across Pennsylvania, across the southeast corner of Pennsylvania to the area of Lancaster. And then it turned south, went into the so-called Valley of Virginia. And there it followed down through the valley, as you see the red line going south, until it came to the crossing of the James River. And there it crossed the mountains, crossed eastward the mountains, and came down about Roanoke and dropped down into North Carolina. And that route continued, of course, on to Salisbury and into Mecklenburg County, and then went further south into Georgia and then Mississippi and Alabama and on to Texas, and was a great road of settlement for the whole of the country. Next. When we talk about the influence of the faith communities on these, on the settlement, although they used the same route coming south, they were in fact of different faith communities and largely of different parts of Europe, or their concentration was from different parts of Europe. First, you had the Reformed, which were Germans who came into the county around 1746. Then you had the Quakers. The Quakers were fundamentally English, although there were some Scottish and Irish Quakers as well in that group. Then you had the Moravians. Moravians, of course, were Germans, and then the Presbyterians, who were Scotch-Irish, and finally the Baptists, who were really a conglomerate of European groups who began to merge because of the Baptist polity, which allowed ministers who were not university trained to be in the ministry, which allowed them to flourish much more quickly, and the other denominations followed. Next. You see here the groups. You see the, first of all, the Reformed, as I said, the earliest to get into the county, and then the Quakers, and then the Moravians. Now, the Moravians are a really good example of this kind of settlement into our area, and they're the best known. But these other groups came as groups as well. In 1753, the Moravians came down from Pennsylvania, starting actually with a planned settlement. They left with 12 people leaving the Lancaster area and coming south to almost 100,000 acres, which they had bought from the Lord Granville, and had picked out for settlement west of Guilford County, but certainly bordering and part of this same story. they came down through the valley in groups as the planned settlement developed. In other words, as they developed the area that they called the Wachovia, they brought more groups of Moravians in. But it was to be a community of Moravians. They were going to be merchants to the region, but they were concentrated as a faith community. The Presbyterians came as a group. The first ones into our county were part of what was known as the Nottingham group, and they really settled as a group in the north or the north central part of the county and further north into what would become Rockingham County. And they came down within 2 years of the Moravians and within a short period of time in little groups. Some of them would stay at places in Virginia on the route for maybe a year, maybe as much as a generation in some cases, and then move down into our area. But they were all bound by their faith. The Baptists, as I say, came from a number of different kinds of groups throughout the Northeast and came down, but they also came into this area from the coastal part of Carolina, Perquimans and county in that area of the coast of North Carolina from Rhode Island. And they moved then across the state and settled in this area. Next slide. This shows you a good example of the 1753 settlement of the Moravians. This is a close-up of most of the Valley of Virginia. And you'll see on that slide that each day it shows approximately how much distance they were able to make on their route south. They kept the best record of their trip, and it could actually be plotted out on a day-to-day basis as they moved south into North Carolina. Next. Now, the Quakers, however, as I say, came down the Great Wagon Road, and they also came up from the coast of North Carolina. So part of them originated in Rhode Island, and part of them originated in William Penn's colony in Pennsylvania. When they came south, they found different areas of settlement. They scattered, but they still scattered in faith groups. And this map shows you how, including our area, the Quakers grouped together. And the Quakers in Guilford County area, of course, concentrated in the south central part of the county and also into Randolph, what would be Randolph County. Next. Now, these other influences on settlement, I'm saying that the influence of the faith communities was what made the area unique. And yet there were other influences that were particular to the area, and we need to understand them not only as the influence that they had, but the inner influence that they had, because each factor was important to the other. For example, you had the Indian settlements already here. And what had the Indians done? But they had cleared land, since they'd been agricultural Indians, the Indians who were here just before moving west. They were agricultural Indians, so they had cleared a lot of land, And obviously, for new settlers, that was the choice land because the work of clearing had already been done. They also had created different trading routes, and these were the first roads really through the area. So instead of having to make a road, the settlers came in and uh, took over essentially the Indian roads and what were called the Buffalo roads. Now it's interesting that in Guilford County we have Buffalo Creek and we have the Buffalo Road running right across the county from east to west or to southwest. The Buffalo roads were literally made by buffalo in passage because there would be so many and they would really create a road in just moving through an area. And these roads then were openings which the settlers used for for their own roads or for their own use in settlement. And of course, the waterways really at this point in time were considered routes of travel. And when they could be used, they were used when there was enough draft for to put a boat in, when they could really, as an opening, they could follow a river in a direction or so. But these were environmental influences that already were in existence when the settlers got here. Next. Now, this slide is a good demonstration of how this settlement worked. It's an overlay of an 1808 map, uh, but it shows these in the yellow these different courses of Indian travel and the buffalo travel, which created the first roads in the area. So you see the influence of transportation and the adaptation of what was already here physically created by the Indians and the buffalo. Next. This map I show only because of the other influence that's particular to our area or applies to our area. It's not unique. Is the Granville Grant. The Granville Grant, Granville, Lord Granville was the only proprietor who did not sell or sell back to the king the area of Carolina. All the other proprietors in Carolina had sold their land grants back to the king, but Granville refused to sell, and his land was marked off. And essentially, his land, as you see it on this French map, you see that his land was a strip across the northern border, was the division between Virginia and Carolina, and then it was so many degrees south. This strip of land really was not sold by agents of the king, but agents that Granville set up. And when Granville died, about almost concurrent with this period of settlement, he his granting of obviously his granting ability or the granting ability relative to his land ceased. And almost until the time of the Revolutionary War, actually grants could not be made in Guilford County. So these faith groups were coming in and settling and more or less securing their location by staying in these religious communities or religious groupings. And this allowed them a stability that they could not get from actual land transfers by grant. They could sell land themselves, one to the other, but they couldn't get additional grant land. Next. If you look, I keep a record of different families from their origins in Europe across Pennsylvania or out of Maryland or wherever their originating route was in North America, then down through the Valley of Virginia, if that was their route, and most of them it was, and into the Guilford area. And when you do this and you look at these families, you begin to see the replication of the settlement patterns. You see in these patterns also the fact that the families that were Quaker followed essentially the same route of families that were Presbyterian and were Scotch Irish followed the same. And you begin to see this common route that they took, or the common routes that they took, right into the area. So you see how much their faith bound them together in their travel. Next. When you look at then what ended up as Guilford County originally, when it was set off as a county in 1771, included Randolph and Rockingham, which were set off later. So Guilford was the middle section of what was the original Guilford County, and the other areas were cut off from it. When you look at that, you can then superimpose the road situation, and you see the concentration in this map of all these roads almost as spokes leading into Martinville, which was the first authorized county courthouse location. And it is from that courthouse that the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, of course, takes its name. You see these spokes still following very much the routes of the buffalo and the Indian. They're still the original courses that they had, but you see that now they're being adapted into the government being established and the settlement of the courthouse. Now, as an aside, I've got to say that a work that Benjamin and I are involved in High Point, which involves the so-called Boyce Lindsay House, was the first actual courthouse, or where the first court met, in a private home of Robert Lindsay in his great room. But the first authorized courthouse location was the one that became the town of Martinville during the end of the Revolutionary War. Next. And then you see this map, which shows the condition of the county in 1809 or 1808, 1809, when they were moving the courthouse from Martinville to establishing Greensboro. And you see now you've got two spoke areas. And in these two maps, you see how these early influences became reality as time moved on. The next. That may be the last slide. All right, let me just say this now. Now we moved into a period of the Revolutionary War in which the whole area was finally beginning in 1780, and then in 1781 was really the cockpit of the Revolutionary War as it moved into the South. And much of it finally in March of 1781 settled in Guilford County around the courthouse. And the relationship really of the faith communities at this point was this was the time that they had to convert from being really anchored to their faith community to becoming Americans. Recently, or in September of last year, there was a consortium held at Wake Forest and Old Salem, sponsored by Wake Forest and Old Salem, entitled Becoming American, and it focused in on the Moravians who had intended to stay as a colony. And although they would trade with their neighbors, they really wanted to have an independent colony. So they had to face, at the end of the war, the question of how did they integrate into a new nation? And those influences began to not erase, but at least in some ways lower the priority of the importance of the faith communities, and the other faith histories developed from there.
Well, thank you, Charles. That was a fascinating description of how the groups all sort of filtered down into the Piedmont, primarily from the Philadelphia area, not solely, but many of them from the Philadelphia area. I often describe Greensboro to visitors, Guilford County to visitors, as the southernmost suburb of Philadelphia. And that's kind of why, is because culturally, I think we're more connected to Philadelphia than we are Charleston in many ways. Through your study and investigation, and I know that most of your work has really been focused on the Scotch-Irish Presbyterians as a religious group, especially here in Guilford, with various personalities. But what characteristics do you see that embodied the Scotch-Irish Presbyterians that are present in our that were influential in our growth in Guilford County and might still remain identifiable today? Do you see anything? And I'm thinking in terms of the Lindsay family and the influence of the Caldwells. And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, before I think about those families, I think of the Scotch-Irish generally. That influence is so strong in the South, all over the South, but particularly in our area and in North Carolina. The Scotch-Irish were very stubborn, bullheaded, very politically motivated in everything. They were clannish. These are all qualities that we see if we look today at the general population of Guilford County and North Carolina. Now, it sounds like I'm being critical of them, but I'm just identifying the nature of the way they looked at things. Presbyterianism was very organized and prided itself in the fact that it had an educated clergy, and therefore they thought that their message was better than everybody else's. They also had been victims of a lot of persecution in Scotland and Ireland. And so when they came to America, by George, they were going to find their land, they were going to squat on it, and nobody was going to get them off of it. And they didn't care about their neighbor. They had their home and their family was the center, and their church was the center of their life. The characters who came in the families that came in particular Guilford County, one of the most influential individuals was David Caldwell. David Caldwell had been born about 1730 in Pennsylvania. When he then went to Princeton University and he got his degree there and became a Presbyterian minister fairly late in life, in his 40s. And he was convinced to come south from the Lancaster area, which was his home area too, to Guilford County. He came here and he founded the two churches at Buffalo and Alamance, which still exist and are still vibrant churches. One was in the group known as New Presbyterians or New Life Presbyterians, and the other one was the Old Presbyterian. The Alamance Church was the Old Presbyterians. They had different ideas within their Presbyterian faith, and yet Caldwell preached in one community one Sunday and in the other community the next. So he really pulled them together, these divergent ideas and polity as far as faith is concerned. And he preached at those two churches for almost 60 years. So his influence came well up into the 19th century. The Lindsay family that we're particularly focusing on over at the Boyce Lindsay courthouse location, the Lindsay family was pure Scotch Irish. Uh, we could trace them back to Ayrshire area in Scotland. Uh, and then they were moved over to Northern Ireland and from there over to America. They appear to have had a fair amount of money when they got here. We haven't tracked down exactly why. It may have been just pure accumulation of money, but they were able to establish a fairly large holding in land, almost 1,000 acres, that Robert Lindsay ended up getting. And again, they were very Scotch Irish in their attitudes.
And it just, your description shows the intellectual capital that we benefited from in Guilford County in the Piedmont from the Philadelphia area with education and wealth. That these were not sort of pull up by your bootstraps people altogether, that there was a lot of influence from that mid-Atlantic region in terms of wealth and education and intellectual capital.
Yes, and let me point out particularly, we neglect to think about our influence from university training. A number of the leaders who came into Guilford County, including Governor Alexander Martin and Caldwell, and also into North Carolina, were educated at Princeton. So we had coming out of the New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia area, we had this educated group of leaders who had a tremendous impact on the development of the county.
And one more question, the Scotch Irish Presbyterians were well established in Guilford County, but and had it not been for the Quakers, then the DNA of this area might have been very different. So obviously the Presbyterians were quite influenced by the Quakers that settled really in the western part of the county, where the Scotch Irish Presbyterians were in the center. What are your thoughts about the influence of the Quakers with the Scotch Irish? Did the two groups mesh well together? Did they organize together, or was there kind of a wall between the two groups?
Well, a little of both. The Quakers and the Moravians were both groups of Germans, so language separated them, for one thing. Their native language separated them. Then there were also the Moravians, particularly intended, as I say, to be a community, and the Quakers intended to be very strongly located around different particular areas. In other words, they intended to keep to themselves. But the Moravians were the trading community. They were the ones who brought skilled craftsmen into the area. So all the areas, Presbyterian, Quaker, German, all looked to the Moravians as a source of trade. And then the Quakers, the same thing, became more craftspeople than the Scotch Irish did. So they were trading back and forth between each other. But again, religion kept them separate in many ways, because the Moravians and the Quakers still had kind of a hands-off attitude relative to government. The Scotch Irish relished the idea of government and were very influential in setting the tone of the government. But the influence of the Quakers was probably dominant in Guilford County, mainly because they dealt with critical social and moral issues that the other denominations were not willing to concentrate with. And I'm talking about slavery, particularly, where the Quakers took a very strong position against slavery, and that influenced the whole of the first part of the 19th century in Guilford County.
Yeah. Well, I hope that your discussion and your slides will inspire more people to investigate and to learn more about the history of Guilford County. We have a wonderfully complex history. It's complicated, but it's also unusual in the South to have these themes of abolitionists and social equity in the early 19th century, as you just described. So I hope that this will inspire people to seek out more information. And you do have a couple of books that you've published. Would you like to just describe them briefly, and maybe someone would like to look into those?
Well, thanks for the opportunity. The first one I did was a biography of Governor Alexander Martin, and I did that in 2005. I've done 14 books since then, and some of them have dealt with the bird land, the 26,000 acres in the northeast corner of Rockingham County on the Virginia line that William Byrd bought at the time he was a member of the Virginia part of the group that ran the borderline between the two states in 1738. I've also done a book on the Settle family, particularly because of their unusual experiences between slavery and the plantation life, and the people the leaders who grew out of it, out of that family, both black and white. And I've also done an historical novel about David Caldwell, which really is one of the best ways to look at this early part of Guilford County and its history.
And if people would like to investigate buying those, or that they're online, if they look for
them, they can get them. I'll give them a plug. They can get them on Amazon, and or they're perfectly willing to correspond or call me, and I've got some that I can send out.
And hopefully the public libraries in Greensboro.
Public libraries have them both in High Point and Greensboro.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a wonderful opportunity to learn more about our county, to celebrate Guilford County reaching 250 years old, which is quite an accomplishment. So thanks again for being here. And you and I work a lot on side projects, and I will have no doubt I will see you soon. So take care.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. We will be here to talk about have our next presentation in the month of August, and that will be always on the third Thursday. So that will be debuted on the 19th of August, Thursday, the 19th of August. So stay well, and thanks again. Bye, Charlie.
Goodbye.
Bye.